The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Dedicated to the survival of American democracy in an increasingly dangerous world, this is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, acted as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy under President Ronald Reagan, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., the go-to man for defense and foreign policy issues, joined by the greatest minds in the security policy business, the special forces in the war of ideas at Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host, with a very special program, one that I've been looking forward to for some time. And perhaps when you hear what we're going to address, you'll realize that it's been long overdue. It is a subject that has frankly become, well, irradiated, I think is a fair way to put it, and yet it cries out for examination. Some have derided those, like our guest this hour, for having the temerity to even ask questions about it. And I myself, I will confess, have an open mind on it. I'm interested in knowing the facts and will follow them to the best of my ability, and hopefully with the help of our guest, to the best of her ability, wherever they lead us. So without further ado, introduce an old friend of our program and a member of our Team B2 working group on Sharia, the threat to America, a nationally syndicated columnist, a star of stage and screen, I am happy to say, Diana West. Now published regularly by Town Hall and the Washington Examiner, the author of a superb book, very much relevant to the question at hand, Death of the Grown-Up. And Diana, we're here to talk today for the full hour with you about an issue that I guess is properly described as the eligibility issue, involving whether the President of the United States is in fact eligible to hold that post, let alone to be reelected to it. Give us a little bit of background, if you would, as to both the facts as best we can establish them with respect to what is required to be President of the United States pursuant to the Constitution, and what we know of, as I say, the President's eligibility, his ability to satisfy those requirements.
I would be happy to, Frank, and I am just delighted to have this opportunity because, as you allude to, this is a subject that does not make it into America's living rooms and parlors. It's not considered polite conversation for the most part, certainly by what might be considered mainstream media, which I would enlarge to include media from across the political spectrum, from left to right. And it certainly doesn't come into the conversation or debate of those among us who are actually charged with the responsibility of upholding the Constitution, and that would be our politicians, our political leaders, and so on. But starting out with basics, just the basic eligibility as required by the Constitution for a president and vice president is quite simple. It must be a natural-born citizen, 35 years of age, with 14 years residence in these United States.
And let's pause there just for a moment, because one of the key questions is there any doubt as to what is meant by the term natural-born citizen?
No, I don't think there is any doubt, although doubt has been cast upon the phrase. This has actually been discussed in our past, particularly in the 19th century. It came up quite with some frequency. And the very famous case of Minor is usually cited as giving us our bellwether definition, which is a citizen born to two American citizens, citizen parents.
So it's not enough that they be born here. They have to be born here and of other citizens who have themselves been born here. Is that basically what it comes down to?
That's what it comes down to. Of course, that is not a definition of all kinds of American citizenship. Obviously, we have citizens who were born in foreign countries, who naturalize, and so on. So this was a specific designation that was much discussed among the founders in order to eliminate any possibility of divided loyalties in the commander of America's armed forces. And the idea was that if somebody was born to a parent with foreign loyalties, then that child would quite naturally have a divided sense of loyalty himself. It certainly was a sensible notion to my mind, but regardless of that, it was something that the founders believed was very important.
Right. So then, all right, we've established in the Constitution a requirement, and as the courts have found, including in the case Minor, this has been further established in law. So does the President of the United States, Barack Obama, fit that definition, fit that constitutional requirement, as best we can tell? No,
quite by his own admission, his own life story as we know it, he obviously cannot fit that because his father was born a British subject in Kenya. And
so quite apart from where he himself was born,
quite apart from where he himself
this other
was born.
natty detail,
yes.
Which is not in dispute, as best I can tell, that his father was not a U.S. citizen, natural-born U.S. citizen. Okay.
So that's your basic constitutional question of eligibility. This has come up in scores of cases in the last 4 years, or 3 years plus, across the country.
The reason, again, Diana West, that we're hearing about these cases is that people in various walks of life in different locales have challenged the eligibility of the president on I guess, various grounds. But yet we almost exclusively have heard about this framed in terms of where he himself was born, which is, of course, a matter of some dispute. But there isn't really any dispute about his parents, is there?
Right. There is no dispute about his parentage. The dispute comes in the reading of the natural-born clause in the Constitution, which would seem to have been settled law, but it has not been so, and there have been tremendous polemicizing against the traditional reading of the natural-born clause that we've seen in the last several years.
Polemicizing is a fancy and very charitable term for this. We'll discuss in a moment what this has actually entailed, including a lot of invective and hateful, suppression of people who've even raised the question. But finish your thought on this point about the natural-born law and the president's ineligibility on its basis, as established law has settled it.
Well, what we've seen is a series of judicial cases where judges have actually declared President Obama to be natural-born based on zero evidence or evidence that is very much contested. So the courts are not addressing themselves to the facts of the case, to the evidence that's being presented. And there is an interesting case coming up next week in Florida. Larry Klayman is representing some citizen plaintiffs there, and he is presenting the case that the president must have two citizen parents, as hearkening back to the case we mentioned earlier, Minor. And the judge in this case, Judge Terry Lewis, has already noted in discovery that while the plaintiff's attorney has case law with his argument, the Obama attorneys have no case law. They have not cited any justification for their argument that the president is indeed natural-born and qualified to be president. So that will be interesting to see what the Obama team brings to the table next week.
Yeah. You've written...
If it's covered.
If it's covered.
It will be covered.
Yeah, if it's covered at all, it will be covered, I'm quite sure, by you, Diana West. Let me
yes.
just say, you've written a column just today about some of the past representations of the president's lawyers in cases like this, in which, even at the appellate court level, and I guess for that matter the Supreme Court level, there's not really been an argument on the facts. There's simply been a contention that this is somebody else's business, never mind. Nothing to see here, folks. Keep moving along.
Keep moving.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess really what I want to say about this, Diana, is that I'm interested in pursuing this, as I know you are, out of a sense of a commitment to our Constitution and good governance, which we are supposed to have pursuant to it. And if, in fact, any provision of the Constitution is being abridged or disregarded or in this case perhaps mutated beyond recognition, it raises questions about the entire enterprise and where we will be going as a nation. We'll be pursuing that momentarily at greater length with Diana West, nationally syndicated columnist, hero of the Republic as far as I'm concerned. Specifically, we're going to talk about in the next segment, where are the documents that might shed light on these very important questions, including where the president himself was born. More on this and that with Diana West straight ahead. We want to know what you think. Leave your comments at 1-800-332-7131.
My name is Sunday Hollis, and I totally lost the cravings for sweets. I totally lost the cravings for bread, even meat. And some people, you would see people say, oh, well, you're eating a salad because you're trying to diet, but you just don't have a taste for any of the junk anymore. And it is so, so, so true. I'm thinking this is something that the celebrities are using. They're just not giving the meta system the credit for it. I've tried everything under the sun, and this is the only product that I have even called the company and asked them, could I sell it for them? This is a product where you can actually use the word awesome. I mean, and it is the whole essence of the word awesome.
Don't wait another minute to start losing weight. Call Judy Singer's The Meta System at 1-800-711-JUDY. That's 1-800-711-JUDY.
The first step in winning a war is to know whom you're fighting. 9 years after 9/11, the U.S. security establishment has failed to tell us. The very words we need to describe the war are being outlawed. We went from the war on terror under Bush to the war on man-made disasters under Obama. Neither identifies the threat doctrine behind the aggression, Islamic Sharia law. That's why the Center for Security Policy assembled Team B, an independent group of national security professionals, including Bill Clinton's Director of Central Intelligence, James Woolsey. The result is a book that challenges the assumptions of the current administration and exposes the supremacist nature of Sharia and the jihad its adherents are obliged to engage in. This report names the names of those responsible and makes plain the mortal peril now posed to America's Constitution, our national security, and way of life. For more information, visit ShariaTheThreat.com or order your copy of Sharia, The Threat to America at Amazon.com.
Experts say there's no shortage of crude oil.
There really is no shortage of oil at the moment.
So why do gasoline prices keep going up?
There's all this fear that's out there, and that really goes a long way to making prices go up.
And home prices seem to be headed even lower.
We really aren't seeing any markets that are showing any sustained recovery at this point.
Now more than ever, is this a timeout or a double dip?
Could halt the economy's recovery in its tracks.
1260 WRC. New choice. Intelligent talk. You're listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C.
We're back, joined once again by Diana West, a colleague of great esteem as far as I'm concerned, a woman who has courageously taken on all kinds of difficult and, in some cases, unpopular questions, and done so with a verve and a clarity of thought that I always find bracing and most welcome. And I'm delighted to have been able to persuade her to spend a full hour with us today talking about an issue that isn't being given anything like the attention that it needs to be by, well, the mainstream media, and for that matter by our political leadership, namely the thorny question of whether Barack Obama is indeed eligible to be President of the United States. And Diana, before the break, we talked a bit about what the Constitution requires, and you established under case law of many years standing, and that Larry Klayman is now again bringing to the fore in a court case in Florida, that there is this natty problem that the law, the meaning of the Constitution has been that his parents must also be naturally born American citizens, and that is not assuredly the case. On so many other points involved in this issue, however, for example, where the president himself was born, there seems to have been, a lack of documentation, to say the least, to put it again charitably. What's going on with that?
Well, this is where things get really fascinating because we're looking at a great unsolved mystery. In fact, this is the greatest mystery, the greatest potential crime in all of American history, because what we are looking at is a president of the United States whose documentation has not been presented, vetted, corroborated, just given a straight story on to the American people. And that is kind of as far as the story goes and as far as the story has to go in order to arouse every American's curiosity and every American's deep and abiding interest in seeing this to a conclusion that can prove Barack Obama to be exactly as he says he is or to prove some other story. We have no idea what it might be. And I think I would like to preface my remarks in saying that having followed this case as best as I can as a journalist, I do not know I do not even have a very strong theory as to what the documents may indeed tell us. I have various theories, but I am not wed to one, and I certainly don't see a narrative that we can cling to, that we should cling to in trying to solve the mystery. But the mystery must be solved, and it does begin with the fact that we have not seen any paper on our president. And that begins with the birth certificate, which one would think is the most innocent, inoffensive document a human being can have because you've absolutely done nothing wrong and you have no points to fear disclosing. But this was not released to the American public until we get to last year. And I think maybe we should start our story with April 27th, 2011, when with great fanfare, the White House placed online an image of what is purported to be Barack Obama's complete, what they call long-form birth certificate.
Right, which had not been in play, despite many, many efforts to elicit it from the administration, from the campaign, for that matter. And much money. As I recall, this was in part in response to sort of the prodding or goading, if you will, that Donald Trump had been engaged in a very, very high-profile way. So he rolls out the long form, and what do we know about it?
Well, it was a very interesting moment because Donald Trump at that moment, if you can imagine, Donald Trump was actually the undeclared GOP frontrunner at that moment of April 2011. And we also had a book by,
as it happens.
Yes, and we also had a book at the top of Amazon, an unpublished book by Jerome Corsi called Where's the Birth Certificate? This was absolutely starting to suck in media attention as it had never had before. Voila. We get this online unveiling. Online, again, this weird kind of online unveiling. And I would like to just read one question from the presidential press conference, the White House press conference of that day, when a reporter said very, very sheepishly on being presented with a copy of what was online. Everyone was given out their own little copy. He said, and this is going to sound, you can just anticipate what people are going to remain unconvinced. They're going to say, this is just a photocopy, a piece of paper. You could have typed anything in there. Will the actual certificate be on display or viewable at any? And then he is drowned out by laughter. So the notion that actually someone should vet, touch, have somebody investigate the bona fides of this image was the subject of derision and laughter inside the White House press corps. And I think that really sets the stage for every development since. And they have come thickly since then.
Well, let's again visit at length about this suppression of the kind of obvious questions that arise, Diana West, in a moment. But just stay with getting, again, what we know, or what we know we don't know, maybe, on the table. The United States Senate, as I think you've pointed out, affirmed formally that John McCain, who also had some people questioning his bona fides in this department as an eligible presidential candidate during the last election cycle, on the grounds that he had been born in the Panama Canal Zone, albeit of two naturally born American citizens, to be sure. The Senate affirmed that. They didn't affirm Barack Obama's eligibility. Did anybody remark on how peculiar that seemed?
I'm sure people did remark on how peculiar that seemed, but it did not again bubble up into the level of any kind of serious national conversation. And maybe that's where we could say that the whole suppression began, because obviously this should have come onto the table early on at that point when two American senators were running for president and we needed to see their bona fides. And frankly, a lot of the blame initially goes to John McCain for not having made this a very frank, open, honest process by inviting his opponent, Senator Obama, then Senator Obama, to join him and essentially dump their paper out for the Senate to go through, which is essentially what John McCain did. He basically said, here, you deal with it. And they went through it and found, that he was indeed eligible.
And Barack Obama did not.
Did not, and it already there was this notion of leaving him alone, of not examining, of not looking too closely, and it's only become more of an unhealthy psychosis, and at this point, I think it has completely corroded people's logical processes, because we've come to a point, and this is why the whole issue is truly so important, we've come to a point where we are accepting the word of authority rather than evaluating evidence.
Yeah. Well, and Diana, before we have to take another break here momentarily, let me just quickly put on the table yet another factoid. It has been revealed recently by our friends at the Breitbart Empire that Barack Obama's own agent promoting his first book did so for 16 years on their website, advertising that he was born in Kenya. And that was not changed, as I understand it, until he was a month or two into the presidential race in 2007. Again,
that's correct.
What's up with that?
Well, again, we can't definitively claim to know the answer. It's not asked. It's not the people who have entree to the president at these in the White House press corps don't ask the question. His colleagues in political circles don't make the point that this needs to be discussed and settled once and for all.
But Diana,
yes.
Again, we're going to come back to why that is. But the point is that the press agent or their shop is apparently saying, well, it was just a mistake that he was, of course, born in Hawaii, and that's been now changed. But again, and we'll come back with one other bit of detail on this momentarily. It raises so many questions about why this peculiar set of circumstances persists and isn't being clarified by the president himself. We'll be back at it momentarily with our guest, Diana West, author of the marvelous book, Death of the Grown-Up, and one of the most courageous women I know. Straight ahead.
Go to SecureFreedomRadio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
Hi, NBA forward Kevin Durant from the Oklahoma City Thunder. Here with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck to remind you to get moving every day.
Because when you get moving an hour a day,
you'll have more energy to do the things you like to do.
And that's a slam dunk.
Whether you like to shoot hoops like me, skateboard, ride a bike,
or dance on your roof, just move it your way.
For an hour a day. Because moving every day puts you on the offense towards a stronger you.
And that makes you part of a winning team.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Bugs.
So be a player.
Be a player.
Get up, play, and move it your way. Check out how to be a player at letsmove.gov.
Head online to get tips on great ways to get moving every day.
You said it at www.letsmove.gov. Let's hear that one more time, Doc. That's www.letsmove.gov. A message from the Ad Council and HHS.
For decades, the Democratic Republic of Congo has endured economic collapse, poverty, and war. More than 3.5 million people have died in the conflict. Today, rebel forces continue to wreak havoc in the eastern Kivu provinces. The International Rescue Committee estimates that 30,000 children have been recruited as soldiers and thousands more have lost their parents. Most of these children lack the most basic level of goods, security, and most especially clean drinking water. Yet, there is a well of hope coming to eastern Congo in a village called Uvira. Washington, D.C.'s National Community Church is partnering with Global Outreach to bring a water pipeline to the Congo for Christ compound, an orphanage for children who have lost their parents to war and AIDS. Building a clean water source will sustain the school, provide for the children, and hundreds more in the village. Go to www.waterforcongo.com. Learn about the work of Global Outreach and give. You can be part of the community in Uvira, and like a well, you can be a source of hope in life. www.waterforcongo.com.
In 1966 in Anchorage, Alaska, a talented child was born. He would go on to be one out of only 11 Alaskans to make it to the major leagues. The odds of him striking out more than 3,000 hitters? 1 in 33 million. The odds of this pitcher being selected to the Major League Baseball All-Star Game 6 times? 1 in 48 million. The odds of this fast-balling philanthropist winning the World Series 3 times? 1 in 3 million. The odds of this man having a child diagnosed with autism? 1 in 110. Hi, I'm Kurt Schilling. Learn the signs of autism at autismspeaks.org. Autism is getting closer to home. From 1 in 5,000 only 20 years ago, today 1 in 110 children are diagnosed. Early diagnosis can make a lifetime of difference. Autism Speaks. It's time to listen. Brought to you by Autism Speaks and the Ad Council. Major League Baseball trademarks used with permission.
What are you doing?
Filling out a loan application.
I can help you get approved, you know.
Really? How?
With this.
A bag of sand?
It's not a bag, it's a pouch. And it's not sand, it's credit fairy dust.
Credit fairy dust?
Yes, I sprinkle some fairy dust on the application, and your credit rating magically improves.
There's no such thing as the credit fairy.
An unbeliever now. But what will you think when your loan is approved?
I'll think my credit score improved because I paid my bills on time, kept my credit card balances low, and only opened a new card if I really needed it.
It's the dust.
It's sand.
Don't deny the credit fairy.
There's no magic to improving your credit, but there is help, and it's free. Go to creditfairy.org. A public service announcement brought to you by the Consumer Bankers Foundation, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Education Fund, and the Ad Council.
Hi, this is Frank Gaffney. You're listening to Intelligent Talk on WRC 1260 in Washington, D.C.
Now more with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome back. We're joined once again by Diana West, a syndicated columnist, author, commentator, brilliant analyst, and as I said before the break, one of the most courageous women I know. I'm going to clarify that. One of the most courageous people I know, and her courage is much in display in her willingness to ask some of these hard questions that need to be asked concerning the eligibility of the President of the United States to be our President, our Commander-in-Chief. And Diana, one of the other things that also has come to my attention, and I can't remember where, but maybe you can recall for me, is that in the campaign to become a United States Senator, the issue arose as to the fact that he was not born in the United States, and he said something to the effect that, well, it doesn't matter. I'm not running for president. You don't have to have been born in this country to be a senator. And that, at least implicitly, it would seem to me, suggests that the press agent about whom we spoke before actually had it right and was, of course, using the authorized explanation of where he was born. And you've addressed this, as has Mark Stein, I think, recently in a terrific piece of his own. Again, what's going on here, Diana West?
Well, there's any number of anecdotal pieces to this puzzle. Now that one's quite good because it comes from Barack Obama himself, but we've had, for example, a mailman who delivered mail to Bill Ayers' parents' home in Illinois has attested on a sworn affidavit that Mrs. Ayers discussed Barack Obama and how excited she was at helping with his education as a foreign student. Again, another little piece. Recently, an ex-Marine has come forward and discussed a conversation. He says he's 99% sure that it was Barack Obama in the very early 1980s that he discussed in Hawaii the fact that Barack Obama told him he wanted to be president, and he also told him he was born in Mombasa, Kenya. So we have just a variety of these funny little stories, not least of which would be his own grandmother saying that she saw him being born in Kenya, that would give credence to that story. The whole thing is such an enduring, and I think you say it's courageous to ask these questions. I find the story like eating peanuts. It is fascinating. It is tremendous
Can't
fun.
stop. Can't help yourself.
Can't stop.
Yeah.
Especially when you see
so many people are stopping. But again, before we come to that piece of this and how it sort of fits into your narrative of the death of the grown-up in this country and what perilous state we might be in with respect to our fundamental freedoms and Constitution. Just stay with me one more. I've had people who are probably likely to find most of what we've just described about Barack Obama, what is known, what has been documented, as pretty persuasive, but for one thing, namely that on the day he was born, there was a birth notice published in the Honolulu Gazette or whatever it was. And that seems to them to have been, proof positive that he must have been born, as he now maintains, his agent now maintains, in Hawaii. And again, just to recall, folks, as we described at the beginning of the program, that wouldn't be sufficient to ensure that he is eligible to be president of the United States, because according to established case law, he actually has to have two parents who are also natural-born citizens. But Diana, just respond, if you would, to that particular question. What explanation could there be for this birth announcement in the Honolulu papers?
So much the perfect question, Frank. That is, if your listeners take away one thing, this is the most important point that has come out. The truth of the matter is, and this comes from the investigators of Sheriff Joe Arpaio's cold case posse, they found, and they say they have proof beyond a doubt, that those 1961 newspaper announcements ran in newspapers that regularly also announced the births of foreign-born babies as well as native-born babies, and that the posse also has documented evidence of two adopted children who were 3 years old before their, quote, birth announcement made their way into the newspaper, all of which proves that showing up as a welcomed arrival as a baby did not suggest any other fact pertaining to where you were born, how old you were, anything. So in terms of using that as the anchor against this terrible story, really, but just sort of the thing people like to cling to in pretending or trying not to follow the trail of fraud further, the newspaper announcements are absolutely useless because they were by no means any kind of ironclad guarantee of a native-born child or even a child born at the time of the announcement.
Okay, Diana West, I want to drill down on this point with you because I have not been following this terribly closely. As I said earlier, this is not something in which I have steeped myself, and I'm ashamed to say. I think you have much more so. And yet it is important to all of us who care about our national security, our well-being as a people, to ensure that there is good governance in accordance with our Constitution. And the questions that you've been raising are very, very troubling in that regard. Tell us a little bit more about this Sheriff Joe Arpaio and his cold case posse. He has been vilified, as we'll be talking momentarily more about, have most people who've had the temerity to challenge any of this. What else have they found? And maybe go back for a moment to what they found about that long-form birth certificate.
Yes. Well, Sheriff Joe Arpaio, I think, was fairly well known as a very brave and strong upholder of American law regarding immigration in particular. He came to national attention in the last few years for his police work in Arizona, Maricopa County, where he, I believe, is the 5-time elected sheriff. Before that, he had a long career, I believe, at the DEA as a DEA official. He is an American hero, and he is tough as nails. John Wayne could have played him when you watch that press conference. He will not back down on the facts as he has painstakingly gathered them with his group of, I believe, 5 investigators, 2 investigators, 3 lawyers. It might be backwards. It might be 3 investigators and 2 lawyers. And I would say they had 3 key findings. This would come on the March 1st, 2012 press conference that I guarantee you, your listeners' media, local media and national media, did not cover. And that to me is just such a crime, such a crime of history. But anyway, the first finding, the most amazing, prominent finding is that the online image of that 1961 long-form birth certificate that was prominently displayed at the White House website, is a computer-engineered forgery. That is their conclusion. They believe that it originated on a computer, not in 1961 as a document that was then scanned into a computer. And for interested listeners, the entire press conference is available on YouTube, which includes their own illustration of the tests, of the computer tests that they ran on the online certificate and on a control that they created to see what would happen in terms of how a scanned document.
So this was a rigorous forensic analysis by professionals in the business. Mm-hmm. Okay. And their finding is that it's a forgery.
It's a forgery.
Yeah. And the President of the United States, the President, just to put a fine point on it here, but because, as you say, many people may not have witnessed this press conference or heard anything about it for reasons, again, we'll get into momentarily. We have the President of the United States and his support system pushing this document out as an authentic representation of the long-form birth certificate, which, as you say, should be the simplest way to clarify this whole problem. It certainly, it seems to me, Diana West, and I gather it seems to you, stinks to high heavens that this particular data point, to say nothing of all the other ones that we've talked about, is with us. So we're going to turn finally in our concluding segment with Diana West to why are we being treated this way, and why are we not getting better efforts made by the people who pride themselves on not letting folks get away with this sort of thing in high office. All of that and much, much more with Diana West straight ahead.
Go to SecureFreedomRadio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
I was able to lose the 80 pounds I gained due to pregnancy. It was pretty easy to eat whatever I wanted and not think about it.
The Meta System from Judy Singer has been helping make weight loss easier for a quarter century.
My husband's grandmother used it 20 years ago to lose weight for a wedding and said it was the only way to go.
The Meta System also has an excellent support staff.
They were very supportive. The first time that I ordered the product, they called me and suggested that I order a lower dosage to begin with. They didn't want me to jump the gun right off the bat, and it was nice to know that they actually cared.
And the weight loss is so dramatic, people wonder.
With the Meta System, I've got many questions about how I managed raising a baby and working full-time and lose the weight and eat whatever I wanted.
People who use it recommend it.
I suggested the Meta System to my mother, and she has lost 30 pounds.
Learn more about weight loss with Judy Singer's The Meta System by calling 800-711-JUDY. 800-711-JUDY. The Meta System from Judy Singer, the powerful all-natural way to lose weight. 800-711-JUDY.
Hey, this is Frank Gaffney. My day job is running the Center for Security Policy, which each weeknight brings you this program. But Secure Freedom Radio is just one of the important contributions the Center makes to the common defense. We call our team the Special Forces in the war of ideas. Like the real Special Forces, we strive to be agile, creative, and highly effective in identifying threats to our country and how they might best be countered. We can't do all this without you, though. Also, like the real Special Forces, ours need ammunition. And in the war of ideas, ammo is money. The Center is a non-profit, tax-exempt organization. Contributions to its work are tax-deductible and an important investment in your security and freedom. Find out more about the Center for Security Policy and how you can help keep its Special Forces team in the fight by visiting securefreedom.org. Many thanks.
If your walls could talk, what would they say?
I have held the same mirror for 13 years.
I have been decorated with purple dinosaurs, baseball teams, and football helmets.
I have witnessed 33 Thanksgiving dinners and 1 wedding proposal.
I have tiny notches marking the growth of 3 children.
I have caused a learning disability.
I am the reason that a 5th grader simply can't sit still.
I am responsible for a 5-year-old's rage.
Just because you can't see lead paint doesn't mean it's not on walls, doors, windows, and sills. Today, lead paint poisoning affects over 1 million children. If your home was built before 1978, your family could be at risk. Let's make all kids lead-free kids. Log on to leadfreekids.org or call 800-424-LEAD.
I am the reason a child has trouble hearing.
If your walls could talk, what would they say?
Brought to you by the Coalition to End Childhood Lead Poisoning, EPA, HUD, and the Ad Council.
In Washington, Hugh Hewitt has the diagnosis.
They don't understand the need for speed.
Oh, we'll get to it. Don't worry. We'll get it done. Open amendment process, blah, 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 blah.
Not in the least bit clued in to the sense of urgency. But I don't think the Beltway is.
I'm just beginning to think it is a Beltway disease.
Kind of an invisible wall separates them from what the people think.
The Hugh Hewitt Show, weeknights from 6 to 9 on 1260 WRC. New choice, intelligent talk.
If you're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan, like me, coming home can be harder than expected. I felt a little out of place, but it turns out I wasn't alone. At IAVA.org, there's a free online community of thousands of OIF and OEF vets who've got your back here, just like they did over there. So now, I'm never alone. I can get the resources I need and talk to tons of people who understand where I'm coming from.
Whether it's navigating the GI Bill
or VA hospitals,
managing the transition home, or meeting people you can share stories with,
you'll find it at IAVA.org. Even if it's just everyday stuff, like getting tips on where to find a nice sweater for my dog. Did he just say that?
Really? What?
Okay, maybe not that, but everything else. No matter where you are, Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America is there for you. Join our community at IAVA.org. We've got your back.
Brought to you by Iraq Afghanistan Veterans of America and the Ad Council.
Go to SecureFreedomRadio.org today. It's your freedom. It's your country. Frank Gaffney's Secure Freedom Radio.
Welcome back. We are joined for our final segment with Diana West. Before we turn at long last to the promised drill down on how on earth the President of the United States is getting away with all of this, if any of these facts are true, and I think obviously many of them are, if not all of them, let alone if all of them are true. Let me just ask you to put one other piece of evidence into play. Sheriff Arpaio's cold case posse found some further evidence of, peculiar findings, shall we say, about the Selective Service record of this president.
Yes. Just to put it very briefly and bluntly, they determined that the Selective Service registration card, which again materialized before our eyes as an online image during the campaign in 2008, is also a forgery, a concocted document. And they also have provided, again on YouTube, their hypothesis of how it was created, and they actually go through a physical creation of a document that looks like the Obama registration card, which boils down to a very strange-looking postmark, and they take you through why they think that's a forgery. It's very stunning information, and what they tried to do was go to the Selective Service Registration Department in Washington and examine the image in person, and they have been denied. Yeah. They have been denied that.
Let's then cut to the chase here. As you say, we have here a series of efforts made to stonewall, to deny access to records in the school years and other periods of Barack Obama's life. We have apparently, at least allegedly, 2 forged documents that have been provided by his immediate coterie. Why on earth, Diana West, are we not hearing more about this? Tell us, among other things, about your own personal experience in trying to bring some of this information to light, or your analysis of it, at least, to light.
Yes, well, I have outlets that have carried my column for years who have informed me of essentially a blanket blackout on anything I write pertaining to the Obama eligibility story, which includes courtroom cases, covering courtroom procedures, covering Sheriff Arpaio's investigation, other newsworthy aspects of this ongoing saga. They just will not run it, and it's extremely disturbing to me for what it says about everything, about our journalism in general. I know of other writers who have been discouraged from covering it by their employers.
Well, you mentioned in one of the earlier segments the experience of this hapless person in the press corps who was essentially jeered into silence and hasn't evidently brought it up again since. So we have an active suppression of this kind of evidence and information on the part of the very interested parties in the White House now. But what is motivating these organs that are, ostensibly, or at least have in the past, found your materials, for example, sufficiently well written and provocative and thoughtful and informative to run them, but won't? And draw from that, if you will, the larger picture of why is this information being suppressed by, the Fourth Estate, the press that is supposed to be a critically important part under our system of government of keeping people honest.
Yes. I can't answer the question with true knowledge because I honestly don't know, but I think that the implications are very strongly underscored and important for people to understand. We are not operating in a free society at this point when you have news organizations and very large news organizations, the largest in the country, living and operating in fear either of investigation, for example, FCC investigation, I've heard, is one threat that comes down, in fear of losing, quote, access, which is much too valued in Washington. People are much too prey to that sort of blackmail. Again, ridicule, ostracism. I mean, these kinds of things are what you expect to find in an authoritarian or dictatorial society, not a free republic operating with the First Amendment protections. We are not operating under those free country protections any longer. And people
it's a kind of self-censorship, in part at least, in response to these outside pressures. Yeah. And Diana, you've addressed this in connection with one of our other important themes, particularly here at Secure Freedom Radio, is the whole business of Sharia and not wanting to rock that particular boat. Yeah, in a way it really is. Tell me, just coming back to Sheriff Arpaio for a moment, am I right that he has been directly threatened, or not just threatened, but is now under active investigation by the Justice Department? I'm sure that they would argue, well, this has nothing to do with, his involvement in trying to find the truth out about the president's eligibility. But do you think this is an accident, comrade, as the Soviets used to say?
Well, it seems hard to imagine a scenario in which it could be an accident, but I'm not privy to any special information regarding that investigation. Certainly, given what we know, it does seem to be quite a coincidence that he is under this kind of assault at this point. Again, part of this effort to marginalize. I mean, you've had even representatives of the very, very few Congress people who have actually even just mentioned the subject, such as Representative Cliff Stearns of Florida. He merely mentioned the notion of examining the evidence pertaining to Obama's eligibility, and they came down on him like a ton of bricks with the White House Communications Director, Dan Pfeiffer, who was one of the presenters of the online image last year, actually tweeting about it, calling into question his eligibility to conduct Solyndra hearings. I mean, the whole thing is so incredible. It's fantastic.
What it is it seems to me reminiscent and redolent, really, of how totalitarians suppress the truth. And we interestingly enough had on earlier this week, Diana West, Paul Kenger, who, as you may know, is the author of a forthcoming book called The Communist. Frank Marshall Davis, The Untold Story of Barack Obama's Mentor. And this follows any number of other books. Aaron Klein's comes to mind about, you mentioned Bill Ayers as one of them, obviously Jeremiah Wright, Rashid Khalidi, and others who were very formative influences on this president. And what they have in common, really, is a ruthlessness with respect to suppression of unhelpful information. Saul Alinsky was, I guess, the past master of it. Freeze, fix, and
Lenin.
And Lenin before him, of course. So, Diana, we've got 2 minutes left. Summarize, if you would, where we are at the moment and what independent-minded people who love this country and take seriously their responsibility as citizens should be making of it and doing about it.
I think that we are in a very dangerous state. I have had many people tell me, including journalists, tell me that they are afraid to report the facts of this story because they believe it will lead to violence in the street, which to me suggests we are no longer, again, living in a free society. We're living in fear, in kind of a thugocracy, if that's how we're operating. And I would urge people, I think that everyone has a very important role to play in terms of notifying Congress that this must be investigated. There is actually, I believe, a petition out there that was sponsored by WorldNetDaily.com, which has done yeoman work on this whole issue, trying to bring Congress to its responsibility, because again, I think that's where this must end up. This must end up in a congressional investigation of the documentation of Barack Obama. And people across the country can light up those phones and give the congressmen some backbone, which sorely they are lacking. And it's very important that people care about this issue in order to bring it to any kind of conclusion or resolution, and just to bring the ship of state back to a steady course, because this is not a functioning or healthy nation if we cannot even know the identity of our president.
Amen. Diana West, we have to leave it at that. I also would commend to you a book that you mentioned earlier, Where's the Birth Certificate, by Jerome Corsi. Check all of these sources of information out, and of course Diana West's superb syndicated columns and Death of the Grown-Up, and do your part. Our country's at risk. Thanks for joining us. We'll be talking with you again next week, same time, same station. Until then, this is Frank Gaffney. Thanks for listening.
We want to know what you think here at Secure Freedom Radio. Leave your comments or questions for us at 1-800-332-7131.
From the nation's capital, you've been listening to Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.